In this bonus episode of Fool Me Twice, I talk to our famous producer, Morry, about Fool Me Twice and how it come about. A lie is where you willfully mislead somebody, knowing that what you're saying is factually incorrect.
I think I lie very well for my profession.
What does a liar look like? What does a psychopath look like?
I just want to say I hope there's a lot of criminals listening to this. You'll be picking up some good tips.
G'day, Steve.
Hey, Morry, how you doing?
Good. Well, the audience is probably a little bit confused. I am not Bradford Oakes.
No, you don't look like him.
I don't look like Bradford Oakes. We are good friends, but we do not resemble one another. And we're here for a little bit of a bonus episode.
We are.
Bonus episode of Fool Me Twice, which I've been looking through a glass panel at the two of you for the last 19 episodes. And this is technically episode 20, but it's a bonus because Brad's not here today.
He's not. He's not feeling well. And for all our listeners, Morry sits behind the glass and he's the brains behind all the editing and producing and marketing and everything. So it's good to have you on this side of the glass.
Well, thank you very much. I thought this would be a great opportunity at episode 20 or thereabouts to talk a little bit about the origin story of this podcast.
Yep.
And then maybe go a little bit further back in time, back maybe even down to 2007, I think, was when we first met.
But time flies.
It does, doesn't it? But let's talk about this origin. So a detective, former detective, current uncovering of lie expert.
So how it happened originally was I was a detective at Flemington and I was always interested in psychological profiling, what made serial killers and serial sex offenders tickers, you know. And I was fortunate enough to go to the FBI, Behavioural Sciences Unit, but the more I learned about that, the more interested I became in cognitive and behavioural interviewing. And while I was over there, just developed that interest. And interesting, a lot of people may not know this, but I come back from my training overseas and a friend of mine at the time, Tara Moss, had just, I think she'd finished her second book and she asked me if I would launch her second book, which I did. And then as a result, the people in the audience, I got a book deal and it sort of grew from there. And then I started getting requests for public speaking.
Yep.
And one thing led to another and then I'm in Dubai training profilers.
Yep.
I'm in the States.
And you're out of the police force at this point?
Oh, yeah. I'd left the police and, just one thing led to another and I got signed up. A lot of people may not know this, but I did an interview with a guy called Sanjay Gupta in the States. He's a reporter on 60 Minutes, but also a neurologist. And he interviewed me and long story short, I was contracted to Jennifer Lopez's production company. She has two at the time, New York in Productions and J-Lo Enterprises. So you never know which direction your life is going to take you. But it was interesting, very interesting.
Well, I had no idea that we were going to mention Jennifer Lopez in this particular episode. This is fantastic for SEO. I'll make sure that Jennifer Lopez is repeated a number of times and so that the powers of Google and AI go, ooh, Jennifer Lopez fans need to listen to Fool Me Twice. Well, that's exciting. So then I meet you. I met you in, technically I met you over coffee, I think, but then very shortly afterwards we get on a sailboat.
That's right.
Yeah, and my memory's quite clear of this. Yours a little less, maybe because you ride a lot of sailboats. But this was, I think, the first time.
I was drunk.
Oh, well, I hope not, because it was quite choppy that day.
I think I do remember. I think I was a little bit seasick, to be honest, because I'm not a sailor.
No.
And I've got a real weak stomach. So I do remember not feeling too well after it.
Yeah, right. Well, we took off here in Melbourne, the Port Phillip Bay. It's a massive bay. I've been told, and I'm not a sailor, that Port Phillip Bay is one of the best sailing bays in the world. You look at it and you go, it's pretty plain, but I guess that's the point. You know, you've got a lot of space. You're not going to bump into each other. It's not
protected.
Protected, and also can be wild, and it can also hit the doldrums, which I learnt was a word meaning that the water goes completely flat. There's not a wisp of air, and you just stop, which I have experienced since. And we got on this I'm guessing it was like 35-foot sailboat. I think we had Spinnaker up at one point, and Chris Mooney was our skipper.
Yep.
And we headed from Elwood Sailing Club, I think it was.
Was it Elwood or Brighton?
Yeah.
Either or.
Anyway, it was a boat we needed to move from one dock to another, and he said, "Oh, come with me. This would be fun." And less for you, more for me. I had a great time. I enjoyed it. Got a couple of great photos that appear every anniversary on Facebook telling me.
And you were in China back then, weren't you?
I was, yeah, and I was with a business partner at the time, and we were looking at bringing you over to China and another person called Michael Hewitt-Gleeson.
Yep.
And it was 2007, I think, when we first met near the end. Would have been summer, a little bit warmer, maybe November.
Yep.
And we got to get Michael Hewitt-Gleeson over. I believe he came at the beginning of 2008. But by the time we were kind of planning for you to come over, the global financial crisis hit.
Yeah, that hit. That certainly hit.
So we took Michael around China, Shanghai, Beijing, and then Shanghai again, doing keynote speeches.
Yep.
And I got to chaperone him. And he's a lateral thinking expert. He worked with Edward de Bono, wrote a number of books. He runs the School of Thinking.
That's it.
And is a consultant. And now living his best life in Roma, near the Vatican. He's a big Catholic history buff, Catholicism history buff. So that is great. Anyway, you were there and we got to meet, and then nothing happened for a long time.
A couple of years or whatever. And then you approached me with an idea.
I did. Now, again, it's all one big circle of life because we're in the studios that are co-inhabited by Stig Weems.
That's it.
And Stig was my very first person I went to with this idea. I needed a producer and a director and really an editor and everything else in between. And I came to Stig having met him once before, and he said, "Oh, look, your idea of this show called Is This Thing On? Sounds good, but it's a little flat. Doesn't have enough depth. You need an A story and a B story, for the A roll and B roll."
So maybe you can explain to the listeners what the concept was.
Yeah, so my other business, when I'm not producing Fool Me Twice or another show called This Week in Comedy, I'm running Hard Knock Knocks Comedy School. And Hard Knock Knocks Comedy School's now in its 10th year.
Wow.
Yeah, now I know you haven't done it.
I have not done it.
Chris Mooney, who we mentioned earlier, who was the skipper of that boat, had done it.
Yep.
Had a great time, and he's got a great story and stand-up story about boating.
Yep. About
sailing to Tasmania and almost dying. And it's hilarious. Back to Stig Weems is that I said to Stig, look, the Hard Knock Knocks Comedy School has such a eclectic group of people, and we don't choose them. Yep. Right? They randomly call, sign up, and then turn up and do this 5-night course with a professional comedian. Bradford Oakes, your co-host, is the resident comedy coach.
And these are people who've never ever done comedy, but had this earning to actually, step outside of their comfort zone and stand on stage and deliver a set.
Some people choose greatness, others have greatness thrust upon them, right? So there's a couple of people in that group that have been given this as a birthday present. Often, and we've trained over 800 people. So I'm stereotyping a little bit. So there are the ones. Well, if you're that funny, do a comedy course. Here's your birthday present.
And what percentage? Did you have any metrics on what percentage of people who got those gifts went through?
Well, they all get through. I think of the course of the 5 nights, we only have about a 2% drop off that don't finish the course. Yeah. As probably to your question though, how many go on and then continue that comedy career? Very little.
Right.
It's more about...
Why is that? It's just the competition, or people doubt themselves?
Well, there's a big difference between being funny and being a stand-up comedian. Right. It's probably the same as being able to cook. I think Bradford Oakes, your co-host, talks about this in the course. He says, being a stand-up comedian is like being a chef in a restaurant. You've got a different audience that you're performing to every night. You don't have a relationship with them, and you're trying to make everyone happy. Whereas being funny...
Which I think is tough.
Very tough. Incredibly tough. Whereas if you are funny around the barbecue or ladies around the Chardonnay glasses after work, you're around a very warm audience of people who like you, are comfortable with you, and probably know your backstory and your in stories, right? As a consequence, a lot of people think that they're funny, but they're not stand-up comedians because they're funny around their friends. They're not funny around strangers.
Good point.
And that is the big difference between those that get the course. Maybe it's a bit of a bucket list ticker. We had two guys in the last course who were both skydivers. A big shout out to Leroy, as his stage name is. Leroy was shitting himself in the course. And one of the other students in the course was beside herself, laughing at how uncomfortable a skydiver is. In fact, I think he'd done 5 jumps that day.
Wow.
Like he's a professional skydiver.
So he's happy to jump out of a plane, but to stand in front of a group of people, totally different.
Totally different. And this was day one. This wasn't even in front of an audience. This was just amongst students.
Because it culminates at the end of actually delivering in front of how many people?
Yeah. Well, we've had as small as, say, 25, but as large as over 100 with about this time last year, we had Jamoan as the headliner comedian, and we took over the entire bottom part of the Limerick Arms Hotel in South Melbourne, and that was over 110 people watching, obviously Jamoan, but also these 10 new comedians.
So you know that a lot of people have a morbid fear of public speaking or standing up in front of a group of people and talking.
Yeah.
And, you know, you hear these stats that some people say that the two biggest fears people have is public speaking and death. And a lot of people put public speaking ahead of death.
Yeah.
And why do you think that is? People feel that they're being judged or they're not funny? Because I remember when we were doing, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, is this thing on? Some people relished standing in front of other people and enjoyed it. Other people were pretty damn scared.
Look, I think might be the lizard brain. You're probably the better person to answer this. This might be back down to that unconscious protective mechanism, the fight or flight scenario where, what do you call it? The amygdala? Amygdala. This is why I don't do your podcast, and that's why Brad does. Amygdala. Would it be the amygdala, that the fight or flight?
Well, yeah, but yes, but also it's an inbuilt fear that we have, and often people are fearful. I mean, it's like the dark, right? You know, some people are scared of the dark. Now, the issue is it's something that's actually created in their own brain.
Yeah.
So, and I noticed this on the show because, as you know, you had me in as a specialist. One of the things that a lot of people said were they were fearful of not just being judged, but also not being funny. Right? And going back to what you were saying before, you know, people will – I do a lot of public speaking, as you know, and people will come up and say, Steve, you're quite funny. Yeah. But I talk about true or real life things that happen to be funny. That's very different from stand-up comedy, isn't it?
Yeah. Again, I'll call on Brad. He's not here in the room. Call on the ghost of Brad. He regularly says that in stand-up comedy, truth is just the departure point. So, and you may want to go here in this direction possibly, although it may not fit your brand, but it's just the departure point. So, for example, you might come in with a great joke. In fact, day one of the Hard Not Knocks comedy course and the TV show Is This Thing On, which was based on the Hard Not Knocks comedy course, the students sit down and they say, oh, I've got a really good one. This actually happened. And I exaggerate my disappointment just so they can see it. And they go, well, what's wrong? I said, yeah, see, the problem is if this happened, and you're banking on this being your joke, it will never be as funny as if you can elaborate, exaggerate, expand, or even fib a bit, you know?
Yep.
You don't have to change the whole, for example, if, you know, Brad is a big guy, if he's talking about playing basketball in the morning and then, you know, skydiving in the afternoon, unless there's a quick joke in there, people aren't going to believe that story, perhaps. But I tell a couple of jokes and have written many, many jokes about my sister. Well, I'm an only child. Yep. And that's what I mean by the truth is just the departure point. A number of other comedians or new comedians come in and they'll say, oh, this is about me, or this is about my dad, or this is about my brother. Well, you know, the topic might be quite sensitive, and it would probably be better if that was coming from an uncle at the closest, and then maybe a former boss or an ex-teacher or someone, because the subject itself might be a little bit sensitive, you know. And we don't censor anyone in Hard Not Knocks, and we just say, oh, maybe don't make that about you because it's pretty dark.
Yeah. And you know, you see some of these big comedians. And, there's no topic that's off limits. And when you look at some of the subjects you're talking about religion, and you're talking about pedophilia, you're talking about all sorts of things. And what's the comedian who has Jeselnik, I think his name is?
Yeah.
Anthony Jeselnik.
Anthony Jeselnik, yeah.
He really pushes the boundaries, but, it all comes down to what you think is funny, doesn't it? And the delivery. The delivery is so important.
Absolutely. And for new comedians, that's part of the problem. They'll see someone like Anthony Jeselnik, who does
has his own style.
Well, and we know that style. So 90% of the audience, and I'll say 90%, not 100%, 90% of the audience know what they're in for. The other 10% are the partners who got dragged along.
Yeah.
Right? Or had no idea, or mum or dad who got dragged along because the kid was under 18 perhaps. And they're like, oh my God, what is this? Whereas if you know you're going to get Rodney Rude type of dark comedy and quite disgusting at points, then you're ready for it. But if it hits you from out of the blue and you're at you're there with your mum and dad watching some family-friendly comedy, and then suddenly Anthony Jeselnik comedy starts hitting you, it's a different story. Which is a good segue to, is this thing on? I remember Stig brought you on or recommended someone like you, and I immediately went to you as the first person to think about. We needed a little bit more of a backstory. Stig said, I think the story about Is This Thing On is good because you've got the crazy people who do the course, like you said. Some got given a gift. Some think they're funny but aren't actually funny. Others have wanted to do comedy their entire life. Some have backstories that are very deep and worrisome, and they use it almost as therapy. Others fairly planned and fairly straightforward, but are looking for the humour. And then he said, but there needs to be another line. Something else needs to carry through a B story. And he said, well, what about if we did psychology on them? What if we looked at their background? And then your name, chance faves the prepared mind, Louis Pasteur, one of my favourite quotes. And I immediately thought of you and said, hey, I've got this opportunity. Would you like to be involved? And I think at the time you were working on a couple of shows, detective shows, but we were able to get you for, was it I think it was 6 days in a row, wasn't it, in South Yarra?
6 or 8, 7, thereabouts, yeah.
I'm glad you said 8.
Were filming thereabouts, whatever, I can't remember the exact. You got me on to obviously talk about the psychology, but also what I noticed is that one of the things that was omnipresent was trying to help some of these comedians overcome their fear of actually literally getting on stage, and because I remember, some of them, had notes everywhere, and referring to their notes, and as you know, you lose the audience. You lost that rapport with your audience. So I found it really interesting because these people were scared but still wanted to go ahead with it, had all these self-doubts about how funny they were.
That's right.
Had that fear of jumping on stage and being judged. So it was a real eye-opener for me in that, we had to provide different coping mechanisms for them to overcome their stage fright and get on stage and deliver. Because at the end of the day, the fear was all in their head.
It was. I mean, it always is, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
We're in Australia. We don't have guns on the street, and we don't have, counter to popular belief by News Corps, there isn't gangs roaming the streets with machetes. It's a pretty safe place. But yeah, everything's in the head. I do recall Kim de Cruz.
Yes, I remember Kim. I do remember Kim.
She was such a lovely person, and still is. She's still with us. And I remember she broke down.
She did.
She broke down and cried, and I suspect you were part of that.
I didn't make her cry.
Did you not break her down to build her up? I don't know.
Well, no. So you never know what's happening in people's lives. And, we have this exterior. We don't know what's happening internally.
Yeah.
And, and she was going through a couple of issues. And it was a matter of sitting her down and just telling her that, you are funny. You do have the ability. And sometimes it's just that little nurture or that little push to get people over the edge.
Yeah.
Once again, it's the fault's in their television set, they think, but it's not always the case. And, how many times have you wanted to do something and you've actually convinced yourself you can't do it? But once you put yourself in that that response, you cross it, then you think, wow, it wasn't that hard after all.
Yeah. And she did that. So episode 1 was actually called, I'm looking at it here, I've had to remind myself, it was called Self-Doubt.
Yeah.
And it featured Kim specifically breaking down and talking about putting too much pressure on herself, as you describe. And she'd done comedy before. This wasn't totally out of the blue. She was warm to comedy. She wasn't a professional by any level. And she brought her cousin, actually, Cara, who was a different style altogether and different background in comedy. But the growth of Kim was amazing over those 6 episodes. And then I think she did probably one of the best graduation performances on episode 6 of the show. Yeah.
But and of course, part of that process was not only getting well-known comedians, but also developing their their talent, developing their jokes. So it's I was quite interested, quite an involved process.
Yeah.
But in addition to that, it was actually dealing with their fears and concerns at the same time. So there was, and I remember, leading up to the final showcase where they got on stage and delivered, and I remember the night really well, and there were some really stressed out comedians.
There were. And if you recall, there was a fellow called Brad. Yeah, I won't say his surname, but you can look it up if you watch the show. And not Bradford Oakes, but Brad had a bit of a meltdown. Like Kim, if I go back a second to Kim had this pressure put on her because she went to a tarot card reader.
No,
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, or someone that reads futures. I assume it's tarot card readers. And the person
Don't
said,
tell me it was something positive or negative.
"Oh, well, it was you're not funny." I think it was like reverse psychology, really. The person
depends on how they take it.
Well, she took it to the point where she signed up to do the comedy course.
To prove the tarot card reader wrong.
Wrong, exactly. I can't remember the tarot card reader's name, but I remember she said, she gave the finger to, they'll call him David.
Well, is she a tarot card reader or a motivator? Come on.
That's right. I don't know. Could have. You know what? I should pay tarot card readers to say, yeah, you should do a stand-up comedy course.
There you go.
Yeah, get a commission. That's smart. And then back to Brad. So Brad had been dating this girl for many years.
That's right.
And she had broken up with him, I think, a week before he signed up to the comedy course.
Yep.
And that was part of his journey was getting over her because it was out of the blue.
Yep.
And I think she moved on very, very quickly with another partner. And so he had nothing to lose. And maybe this goes back to the earlier point about fear. Does that make you fearless when you have nothing to lose?
Well, yeah. I mean, they always say be careful of people who have lost everything and have nothing further to lose. But the other side of that coin is that we often experience different emotions, and he was going through that phase, no doubt. But it was a matter of he was all over the place, wasn't he? And a couple times, or one time he walked out. I remember that.
He did. You chased him down the street.
I didn't exactly chase him.
Well, that's
down
how
the
we made
street,
it appear on the film and the TV show.
But it really makes you think that one of the interesting things about comedians or people who stand up and deliver or speak, sometimes you have to do it, and you may not be in the right headspace. Now, I know this from my personal experience. Sometimes I can get on stage and, I was in Vegas and there were about 4,500 people there, and I know I killed it.
Yep.
Other times I think, you know what? I just didn't get the feedback, or I didn't feel like, and people would come up, oh, that was fantastic, blah, blah, blah. So sometimes we are our own worst enemies, and I guarantee comedians would be the same.
Yeah, no doubt. I've heard some comedians, there's one comedian, I can't recall who said this to me. It might be Lars Kallio we've had on the podcast, but whoever it is says they're allowed to worry about the show that they just did that night, but then they don't allow themselves to worry about it the next day. They give themselves...
Easier said than done, because there's no doubt some would go off and think, it didn't work out or whatever. And they were probably better than what they thought. It's their self-assessment as opposed to how other... And to me, if you've got people in the audience and they're laughing, well, then you've achieved your objective.
Yeah. Well, part of the challenge, as a producer of comedy, part of the challenge I have is getting Australian comedians, in fact, all comedians suffer this problem, to become famous enough that they become household names. I think the listeners of this podcast could probably name half a dozen British, half a dozen American stand-up comedians that probably have trouble with half a dozen Aussie stand-up comedians, I reckon.
Why do you reckon that is?
Well, thanks to the internet, and I mean that sort of sarcastically, it is a lot easier to see the best in the world. And, of course, the US has
but some of these guys, the best in the world, weren't the best in the world in the early stage. So, obviously through, now you can film yourself or whatever and really get that momentum, but also get that audience.
Yeah, well, that's right. We don't have, and we're just getting it right now, your Netflix specials, for example. They're just, and this is a call out to the Australian government. Come on, guys. If I'm paying money to an American company like Netflix, for example, or Amazon Prime or any of the others, then they need to give something back to us. And that is airtime of Australian comedians. But to that point, what I mean by that is a lot of comedians get up on stage. They may or may not do a great job. Look, it's even worse when they do a great job. The audience doesn't remember who they are. I've been at bars after gigs, many a time, and the punters come up to the comedian I'm talking to who's done a great job, very funny, and they go, "Oh, you were very funny tonight." And the comedian goes, "Oh, thank you very much. What was your name again?" To the comedian, right? And that's part of the problem. So I guess in a way, don't be too concerned if you do a bad job as a comedian, because reality is people probably don't even remember who you are. Which brings us back to this podcast, the origin of this podcast, and Bradford Oakes. So Bradford Oakes is my partner with Hard Not Knocks. He was one of the guests.
So he's been one of your instructors, for lack of a better word, or teachers, trainer, whatever, from day one,
Day one, I think.
Yes, I do remember you had several. You had Elliot Goblet, Jack Levi, you had
well, we've had Lawrence Mooney.
That's right.
We've had Bev Killick, Jamoan I mentioned earlier.
So you've really
Dave
got
Hughes.
access to some great, well-known comedians, haven't you?
I would like to say people who are recognised at the bar and wouldn't be told, "Oh, what's your name again?"
Yeah.
No, I've got and not only here in Melbourne, but we went to Sydney. We had Matt O'Kine, who's a great comedian and an actor, as you may know, Mother and Son. He's the son of Mother and Son, and he's a great I like his political comedy. He's a different style of comedy again. We've been to Wagga Wagga with Dane Simpson. He's a great comedian, Indigenous Australian comedian. And we've even been to Geelong. So
just as you were talking, one of the things that reminded me of, you had a particular episode or session on heckling.
Yes.
You remember that?
Yes.
And what I found was really interesting. So not only are they some of these upcoming comedians dealing with the material and their delivery and all that sort of stuff, they were also dealing with how to handle hecklers. Now, some people do that really well, others don't.
Well, to those listening and worried that this is a norm, it's not. Hecklers in Australia, well, perhaps hecklers in Melbourne less so. Sydney's had a history, and we're going back to the late 80s and 90s, of being a rougher crowd.
Right.
But here in Melbourne, I've been producing comedy for the last 10 years in my own comedy venue and with others. Heckling, the worst type of heckling is when two people just talk to each other. And
so not at the comedian.
Not at the
stage.
comedian.
Oh, okay.
Because at least if it's at the comedian, there's a little bit of option to shut them down by not responding, right? Because a conversation has to have two parties, right?
Yeah.
So if
but that can be very annoying if you're on stage delivering.
It can be, and well, if you've ever had a partner do the silent treatment on you, you know it's quite effective, right? So the best weapon for a comedian with a heckler is silent treatment. Just ignore that person.
But what happens if they keep going? What
Sure.
do you do?
And then
or attack you? And I would assume, correct me if I'm wrong, maybe alcohol might have some bit to play in that. Like a bit of a truth serum. People start blabbing things out.
Well, absolutely. Well, I'll give you a case at the Melbourne International Comedy Festival, which was in April just recently. I was producing a show for dark comedy, and we had probably a room of 45, 50 actually, 45, 50. It looked like a group of footballers, and I say soccer players, had turned up. I think they were staying in the hotel and they'd booked a ticket. I don't know how high up. They weren't famous in my mind anyway, but they had a couple of drinks. Might have been the last game for the season or the last game for the week. And one guy, not only was he annoying in the audience, on the escalator ride down to the rooms where the comedy was being held, he turned the bloody escalator off. So everyone had to walk down the escalator in this hotel. So I knew we had a problem before he'd even show me his ticket. He had a ticket. I let him in. I wasn't sure at that point whether he was the one that shut it off, but soon after I discovered it was him. His coach was there. He was probably in his mid-20s. His coach was in his 40s to maybe early 50s. So I thought, we're pretty safe here. I put him in the back row and the comedian started performing, and then I noticed that the row in front of him started turning around. I could see, normally see back of heads, it's just black hair or dark
talking
hair.
to each other.
And then suddenly, no, they weren't talking. They were complaining. That's worse. The person in the row in front of these two guys, was turning around and saying,
the audience member behind were
could you
annoyed.
please shut up, please?
Gotcha.
I'm trying to enjoy the show. And there was a woman talking to a man. So that's actually quite a good scenario when a woman tells a man to shut up versus a man telling a man to shut up.
I thought you were going to say when people in the audience tell the annoying people to shut up.
Yeah,
because
that was
the
it.
audience are actually acting for and on behalf of the comedian.
That is exactly what I meant. Yeah. That's what I'm suggesting or saying outright. So she turned around a number of times and he kind of shut up, but then he ignored her because, he's better than everyone, and that's the problem with hecklers.
There's the group dynamic, the psychology of group dynamics,
Yes.
allowing the audience to actually take control where the comedian can just sit back.
Yeah, that's right. So I walked up to him and I said, hey mate, please be quiet. And he looked at me and he kind of, I've got a 17-year-old son. I know what that looks like. It's like, yeah, shut up, Dad. But I'll behave. Anyway, not 2 minutes later, she's turning around again. I can see her mouth moving. She's kind of whispering. So she's doing her best not to disturb the whole show. I walked up to them again and I said, hey, guys, you're out. And I decided I'm just going to go straight for the jugular. I'm just going, you guys are out. Yep. And the guy that he was talking to next to him, a little bit younger, goes, nah, you didn't give us a warning. And then it occurred to me, of course, they're soccer players. They need a yellow card first. And then a red card. So I said, yeah, right, you got a warning. And it, ironically, I'm now telling you this totally happened. And it did totally happen. But if I turn this into a joke, there's going to be a little bit more of a backstory. But yeah.
All right, so getting back to the genesis of our podcast.
Fool Me Twice. Yeah. So lying is part of comedy. And like I said about my sister not existing, and I know that your job is uncovering lies. In fact, that's your career and that's your brand. And I spoke to Brad Oakes probably over a couple of beers and was talking about an idea for a podcast. And I thought, wouldn't it be great to talk about lying, but from the two perspectives of lies? One uncovering the lies and one creating the lies, not for nefarious reasons, to make people laugh. And maybe in your case to solve crimes and help people. So it's all very positive. And I thought this could work. And Brad actually loved it. And Brad,
I remember I was in the South Melbourne market when you actually approached me about the idea.
That's right. Again, a little bit of serendipity. I saw you. You're, what are you, 6'3" or something? 6'2", so you're an easy man to spot. And I said, I've got an idea for you. And you were busy. I think you had some friends with you at the time. I said, I'll get back to you. We had a meeting at the Limerick Arms Hotel where it all began.
The genesis of the little seed there?
That's right. And Brad was there and I kind of accidentally, maybe on purpose, had a phone call and walked away and let the two of you talk to each other.
So you were just seeing a little bit like when I filmed The Hunters. They wanted to see what the connection was between us.
Yeah, I didn't want to force it. I didn't want to be like the matchmakers between a couple going, well, tell him about that job and how much you make in that job. So I left it and the two of you were having a great time. And I quickly learned that in some...
It's about symmetry and it's about chemistry, isn't it? About whether or not there's a connection or not.
There was chemistry, but there was also history. Indirectly, you didn't know each other, but you knew people through one degree of separation. Yep. I suspect Brad, with his union background, may have been on the other side of the wall of police. Or...
I was wondering one day whether or not he was one of the demonstrations behind the lines.
Right. Yeah. Like, did you accidentally bat on him?
No. I worked on a couple, back in the uniform days, worked on a couple demonstrations and... But the vocal ones, and I'm not saying Brad was in that any of those demonstrations, but the vocal ones were not the ones you had to worry about.
Right. Oh, right, the ones
It was
that...
the one who throwing bottles at you or throwing ball bearings under the horses or whatever it was.
Oh, that's
or
terrible.
Glass and whatnot. But you know what I never got about that was back in those days, you would have uniform in front, then you'd have the riot squad behind, then you'd have the horses.
Yeah.
Right. And I remember doing training, and what would happen was if you would spot someone, you had to be really careful because if you went in there, the crowd could attack you. So what would happen is you would open up the line, and then you would form a V pattern.
Yeah.
And then you would get whoever it is you were going to arrest and then draw them back. But if there's a large crowd, protection, of course.
Yeah.
But what I never got was we were always in front of, the riot control people and in front of the horses. And I'm thinking, well, if you want to disperse a crowd, why not just open the gate and let the
horses go through, yeah.
Let the horses. And we were always the first line fodder. But I do remember a demonstration I went to in Adelaide. I was in South Australia Police, and there was a big sit-in, and we were told by the bosses not to make any arrests. Yet they were sitting on North Terrace. All the traffic was banking up for miles. And anyway, then fast forward, the boss says, "Okay, start clearing them." So I remember I went to one of the girls there and I said, "Okay, what's your name?" And she goes, "Melanie Springs." And I said, "What's your address?" And she goes, "A Great Artesian Basin." So, of course, instant arrest for false name and address.
Oh, right, okay.
But, demonstrations and riots have changed somewhat since the old days.
Well, the Great Artesian Basin is enormous. Yes. And probably encompasses Adelaide, doesn't it? I mean, it's underneath.
But it's not an address per se.
No. Right. Well, I don't know. A good lawyer could get her out of that, I think. It wasn't the student union, was it, protesting? This was
no, it was against mining at Roxby Downs.
Oh, okay. Right, and they did it in the middle of Adelaide instead of
that's
down.
where all the people are.
Oh, right, okay.
That's where the media are.
Causing disruption.
Yeah. But anyway, so getting back to our story, and then, so Brad and I and yourself got together, put together a few ideas to basically bounce things out to see how they were. And now we're at, 19, 20 episodes?
Yeah, well, this is technically 20, but we'll call this a bonus episode as Brad's not here. And we'll bring Brad back next episode for episode 20, which is part 2 of the anatomy of a murderer. Yeah, of a murder.
Murderer.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah, I guess the anatomy of a murderer could be his colon and his intestines, right? Versus the anatomy of a murder.
I'd like to even put it further ahead. So the anatomy of a murder investigation.
Ah, great. Well, I think that's a great place to leave it. Ladies and gentlemen, Steve Van Aperen, thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, Morry.
Thank you.
Thank you, buddy.
I just want to say I hope there's a lot of criminals listening to this. You'll be picking up some good tips.